Money did not begin as power. It began as a tool. Over time, that tool changed, not because money changed, but because the systems around it did. Every law, every crisis, every expansion left its mark. To understand where we are today, we need to understand how we got here.
You know, when we think about the cost of war, our minds usually jump to soldiers, tanks, and battlefields. But what if I told you some of the biggest costs aren't paid in blood, but in dollars and cents, long after the fighting stops? We're going to dive into one of the most significant of these, the hidden price of war.
Right here. This one sentence is the key to this whole explainer. It's a pretty bold claim, right? Connecting a massive global conflict to the price of, well, everything. To really get how a war fought decades ago can still quietly reach into your wallet today, we need to follow the money and unpack the incredible chain reaction it started.
Okay, so first things first, you have to appreciate the absolutely insane scale of the problem we're talking about. These global conflicts, like the world wars, created financial shockwaves so big that no country was ready for them. It forced everyone to completely tear up the old economic rulebook.
So yeah, you have to think of these wars not just as military events, but as massive economic accelerators. It wasn't a choice, it was pure necessity. Governments had to ditch their old ways of doing things and invent entirely new strategies just to keep their economies from collapsing under the extreme stress.
Think about a country's reserves like its national savings account. You know, it's the gold in the vault, the taxes it brings in. But the price tag for a world war? Paying for millions of soldiers, all those tanks, planes, ships, the endless ammo. It was so astronomically high that no country's savings could even come close to covering it. They were spending money they literally did not have.
And that, right there, is the million-dollar question. Or, in this case, the trillion-dollar question. If the money just isn't there, if you've already spent your entire savings account and then some, how do you keep the war machine running? Where does the cash for this impossible bill actually come from?
Well, the answer lies in a nation's economic arsenal. When faced with these impossible costs, governments had to get creative. They turned to this powerful three-step financial strategy to fund the whole thing. Let's break down that playbook.
So here's how it works. Step 1. Like we said, you spend way more than you have. Step 2. To cover that massive gap, you borrow incredible amounts of money, which makes your national debt just explode. And then step 3, to handle that new debt and pay all the immediate bills, you pump more money into the economy. It's a chain reaction, and a really risky one. Let's just focus on that second step for a second. We're not talking about taking out a small loan here. When a country expands its debt for a war, it means selling billions in war bonds to its own citizens, borrowing from other countries. It's basically taking out a gigantic mortgage on the nation's entire future. The national debt just skyrockets to levels you've never seen before. And that brings us to step 3. To pay for everything and manage this new mountain of debt, the central banks get involved. And to put it simply, they just create more money. This flood of new cash solves the immediate problem. You can pay soldiers, build factories, fund the war. It feels like a fix, but, and this is a huge but, it comes with a major delayed consequence.
Which leads us to this next big idea, the deferred invoice. See, all of this financial gymnastics isn't really paying for the war at all. It's just kicking the can down the road. It's like putting the entire cost of the war on a national credit card with a pay-later plan.
This quote just nails it. The real economic pain isn't felt while the fighting is going on. Nope. The real bill for all that borrowing and all that new money, it gets sent out later. It's deferred for a whole new generation to deal with after the war is over.
I mean, the contrast here is just so clear. On one side, you have the immediate costs you can see and touch, the soldiers, the tanks. But on the other side, you have these invisible, deferred costs that just hang around for decades, a massive national debt, and crucially, the eventual watering down of the country's own currency.
So that's the big question, isn't it? You can't put off this deferred invoice forever. Sooner or later, the bill for all that spending and borrowing, it finally shows up. What happens then? How does a country finally settle this astronomical debt?
And here it is. This is the answer we've been building up to. That final payment, it's made through a process that works just like a hidden tax on every single person. This is when the true price of the conflict finally comes out of the shadows. This completely reframes how we think about inflation. We usually just see it as prices going up. But in this context, inflation is the payment method. All that new money that was created during the war is now chasing a limited amount of stuff in a post-war economy. That pushes prices up for everyone and makes the currency worth less. Every dollar you have buys a little bit less. And that collective loss of buying power is how the nation finally, quietly, pays off its war debt.
And boom, we're full circle. Now you can see the whole chain of events, right? A huge war needs huge spending. That spending is funded by taking on debt and creating more money. This just defers the cost, but eventually that massive bill gets paid through inflation, which acts like a silent tax on the entire population. It's the hidden cost of war. So let's just run through that logic one last time. Immense wartime spending leads to massive debt and money creation. But that's not a free lunch. It's just pushing the real cost into the future. And that cost is ultimately paid by all of us through the devaluing of our money, which we call inflation. It's a powerful and often totally overlooked consequence of conflict.
And that really leaves us with one last thing to chew on. We've just unpacked this entire economic chain reaction that leads to inflation being a hidden cost. But if a cost this huge can be hidden in plain sight for so long, what other long-term consequences of conflict are we still not seeing?
History does not give instructions, it gives perspective. Money itself remains neutral. Time and interest decide whether it works for you or against you.